You see your executive team agree in meetings. You have action points that you're going to move forward on, but then they act differently behind scenes, or they don't actually act at all. They're not taking ownership. You don't see the energy you'd expect. You don't see the independence in moving towards the priorities that were agreed on. Maybe you tried to fix it. You tried more meetings, clearer goals, another leadership retreat, but the same pattern keeps showing up. People say yes, and then nothing happens. Super frustrating. This is not alignment, and it silently costs your business trust, momentum, and execution. It's a big deal. I'm going to show you the four-step process to build real alignment and forward motion with your top leaders that actually gets everybody moving forward together. So it's pretty common on teams for people to all come to a meeting. You've probably sat through more of these meetings than you care to think about, where everybody comes together, meets, you have agreements around actions that you want to take, and then nothing happens. You come back to the next meeting and there's no progress, there's no clear momentum, there's no clear anything that happened. Everyone is busy doing all of the other things, putting out fires, all of that kind of stuff. This is a preventable issue. It's a changeable issue. It is not necessary that you stay stuck in this place, even if it feels that way. There's changes you can make that I want to introduce to you that help catalyze your team, pull them together so that they can begin to make consistent forward progress. However, it begins with you as the leader. You have to be the one to make this happen. There's a handful. I'm identifying for these purposes 6 different components that if you put them all into place and you check them, you are very likely to have a team that will be aligned with each other, and they'll make consistent forward progress. The first thing I want to introduce is values. This is something I talk about a lot. These are organizational values. I'll elaborate on it in a little bit here. Having a clear vision, where you want to go, what you're trying to build, clarifying your priorities. A lot of this is familiar to you if you've watched my other videos. Clarifying roles and responsibilities. There's a concept that not many people talk about, which is success behaviors. I find this to be really critical, and people who do identify and follow their success behaviors are the ones that differentiate themselves from everyone else. And so this is, I'll get more into that in a bit. And then accountability practices. There's an N in there. All right, accountability. So these are the 6 basic ingredients that if you put them all into place, it really helps your team snap together. It's not that complicated. There's a little bit of setup in this, but once you have it, it's pretty easy to maintain and very easy to run your organization. This is why when I work with scaling organizations, we have to work these things out for larger organizations to be able to really stay together and work well. And it's why leaders of somebody who's running a $100 million company often does not have to work as hard as somebody running a $10 million company, is because they've built alignment and the structure that supports alignment so that their team can really work together and pull together to get things done. So let's talk about why alignment breaks down. And there's really 2 reasons. One is that these things are not defined. There's ambiguity around all of it. So we go into a meeting, we come to an agreement. To us, it feels clear in that meeting, and you feel an emotional sense of completion or satisfaction. We came to an agreement, and now we can all move on. But that emotional sense of satisfaction or completion, it's kind of deceptive. It can cause you to believe that something has been defined clearly, but it often hasn't. And people will often walk away from those meetings not clear about who's responsible for what, and what time is it supposed to be due by, and what resources are needed for it, and so on. The other thing is that alignment conversations are often treated like events as opposed to disciplines or practices. I like to use fitness analogies. It's the idea that I can go take a 1-week boot camp somewhere, try to get into a bunch of shape in a 1-week boot camp, and that's going to carry me for the rest of the year. That's just not true. If you really want to stay in shape, get in shape, and stay in shape, you have to make a lifestyle out of it and put habits and practices in place that allow you to eat well and move well so that you can have the fitness level that you're desiring. That comes from a lifestyle. And it's the same thing with a well-operated, well-managed organization. It's a sense of a business lifestyle. How do you change the way this business operates in its day-to-day practices so that it produces a fit business as opposed to one that every once a year does a boot camp and hopes it'll do magical results. So here's the first step. I mentioned there's going to be 4 steps. Here's the first one, and that's to define all of your alignment points. And so I'm going to go over this at a relatively high level. In other videos, I talk about them in more detail, but I just want to give you an understanding of what they are. Values, your organizational values, are the definition or the recipe for how you make decisions as an organization and how you behave, or what kinds of behaviors are acceptable or not. That's what values are. How you make decisions, what's appropriate decisions, and what's appropriate behavior. And so the problem that, well, most organizations never define them. The ones that do often do it as more of a marketing exercise, and it gets produced in a way that might sound good, but doesn't really mean anything. You can usually tell when you look at an organization and they have values statements that, there's an acronym in it, or they rhyme, or there's something kind of cool looking about it. It's usually a sign that, not always, but most of the time they became marketing statements and they're not really embedded into the lifestyle or how you do things. Other value statements that have a word, like we believe in quality, and then we have a definition about here's what quality means to us, because we know that many people might relate to the word quality differently. Here's what it means to us, and it tells you how to make decisions that are quality decisions or decisions about quality, and it tells you how to behave in a way so that we protect quality, or how you relate to quality, if that's one of your values. So my recommendation around values is that you define them, that you usually only have 3 to 5. When I see organizations with 15 different values, that's great that you value lots of different things. Some of those values are going to be more highly valued than others, and if you don't define those ones, those are your core values, you have ambiguity, and you're not actually equally pursuing all 15 values at the same time. You just aren't. And so you need to cut that list down. Doesn't mean don't do the other things, but your core values are going to be a small group that really guide decisions and behavior. The second thing is vision, which is here's what we're building. Here's what we're trying to accomplish in the big picture. Now, this doesn't mean, it used to be very, very popular when I first started doing this kind of work decades ago to be thinking 10 or 20 years out. There's very few organizations, really, where it makes sense to think 10 or 20 years out. You might think about it a little bit, but things move so fast, especially in the small, medium-sized business market. It's often an unrealistic exercise to spend too much time thinking 20 years out. You might have a vision for what you want to build, and that's fine, and it might extend out 20 years, which is okay. But I find that people get more traction when they have a nearer term vision, like something in the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. It's easier to set intent around that period of time. If you have your values defined the way I described and your vision defined, here's how we make decisions, here's how we behave, and this is what we're trying to build, that on its own creates a lot of alignment for your team, assuming they all agree with it. They're all bought into, yes, this is how I want to make decisions and behave, and this is what I want to try to build and pursue. Your priorities are the shorter term objectives that you're trying to hit to accomplish your vision. So typically, these will sit in an annual range. It could be shorter, it could be longer, it doesn't really matter that much, but these are the specific priorities for, let's say, this year. And typically there will only be 3 to 5 of these as well. I like these smaller numbers because if you have, there's that old, I think it's a Chinese proverb that the man who chases 2 rabbits catches neither. And so there's a lot of truth in that concept that if you try to do a whole bunch of things, you're probably not going to accomplish any of them. And so what I like to encourage is that you have no more than 3 to 5 priorities in your organization for a year, and that those are the primary steps that if you accomplish those, you'll make meaningful progress towards living out your vision or moving towards your vision. So clarity about values, vision, priorities. The fourth thing is roles and responsibilities. This is one of the most common areas of conflict in an organization, is ambiguously defined roles or responsibilities. The simplest way to understand roles and responsibilities, who is responsible for what and who is responsible to whom. So you remember those things. It's a definition of responsibility. As organizations grow, this becomes even more important. Because if you don't have clear lines of how responsibility is apportioned or delegated throughout the organization, you're going to have problems. You're going to have challenges. And it's very hard to practice accountability if you're not really sure who is accountable, like who is the person that was responsible for that. And if you're a leader and you're listening to this and you're responsible for shaping this, you're an owner or an executive, you have to make sure that this happens. Again, this is one of the most common reasons that there's conflict or problems or stalling out in organizations is people aren't really sure what my job is. Then success behaviors. This element here is the way I usually frame it is when you have your meeting, you have a big retreat or you have a really big planning meeting or whatever it is, and then everybody walks away, there's that thought that goes through some people's heads of, well, that would be great. If we all just did this around here, then maybe that would happen. You know, maybe it's show up to meetings on time, respond to emails, be complete with our reporting, whatever the topic is, you know, actually communicate what we're thinking in the meeting as opposed to after the meeting. Usually success behaviors are pretty boring sounding, like what I just described, showing up on time, being prepared for meetings. They're not that exotic. But you know, what are the things that create problems in your organization? What are the things that are creating problems for this team to actually execute together well? Usually everybody knows those. It's an exercise that takes, you know, seconds, maybe a minute to figure out. It's not that hard because you're living in that space. And so I like to take whatever the top 1, 2, or 3 key success behaviors that people realize, if we all just did X around here, or X and Y, then we would stay in alignment with all of these and we would pursue the results that we're trying to pursue. Then you define those so people understand it, and then you have a conversation on a regular basis. My recommendation is at least monthly around those success behaviors. You can fold those success behaviors into performance reviews. Like, how well is that person in alignment with these? Now, these success behaviors evolve over time. Maybe they're really valid for a year or half a year, and then people really nail them. And you realize, okay, here's the new set of success behaviors. But what you want to do is pay attention to these. If this is the kind of leadership problem that you feel like you're dealing with, alignment issues, conflict, accountability, people saying yes but not really making commitments, I go much deeper into how to address these in my book, Conflict and Leadership. The link to that book is down below. But before we keep going, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps other people find the video and get access to good content like this. So for the final step, we want to talk about, or not the final step, the final component here is accountability. And accountability is one of those things that if you put it into place, it just makes things happen. It's very consistent and it's not a threat. But accountability has developed a sort of negative stigma to it, and leaders can feel very uncomfortable bringing accountability to their team. And you don't have to. I work with groups all the time, and I bring them enormous amounts of accountability simply by saying, we agreed that, I don't say this, but we know that there was an agreement towards the priorities, and this was this month's or this quarter's priority. You know, Jim, can you tell me what was your progress towards this priority this year or this month? Jim answers the question. We have whatever discussion we need to have around it, and we move on to Sarah, and then we move on to the next person. We move on to the next person. That's accountability. It's no more threatening or hard or difficult than that. So what I encourage that to have good accountability practices is to have a built-in cadence for accountability, meaning you have a regular meeting structure and everybody knows that when you show up to the meeting, you are going to be asked to give a quick update on where your progress is towards those priorities that you're supposed to be pursuing within a given time frame. And if these are defined well with measurable outcomes, they're very easy to report to. 50% done, have a problem on X, have a question about Y. Very easy to have that conversation. And you can start to see if people are falling behind or keeping up. And you can begin to problem solve and coach with people in that process. So accountability very naturally, very easily rolls into a mentoring or coaching conversation. It doesn't have to be disciplinary or punitive. That comes if you have somebody who just refuses to work or to follow any of these criteria here. But generally, it's just showing up and asking, did you do the thing that was expected within this time frame? Very easy to do. So if you build a practice around that, you'll see things snap together. In my experience, teams generally, I would say, within about 3 meetings of me asking them if I'm coming in from the outside, and they get used to like, oh, Christian's not going to go away. He's going to ask me the question. And I just simply sit there and stare at somebody until they answer the question, makes them uncomfortable. They finally say, I didn't do it this month. It's like, okay, what do we need to do to make sure it gets completed by next month? Or, well, I noticed it hasn't happened for the last 2 months. Is this important enough for us to pursue? And they usually say, yes, it is. And it's like, okay, what do we need to make sure that it gets done this coming month? And I just keep it very simple, very matter of the fact, and it produces accountability. This is primarily what I'm talking about. All right, so that's step 1, is to define all of these. Step 2 is to make this alignment explicit. Like, be very clear. Don't assume that anybody can read your mind about any of this. So you want to make sure and just ask people, are you committed to living by, to leading by these values? Are you committed to pursuing this vision? Are these the right priorities for this year, this quarter, this month? Are we all clear on what our roles are and what our responsibilities are? Do we all agree that if we do these 1 or 2 things, we show up to meetings on time and we respond to emails in a timely way, that that's going to be the difference that makes a difference for all of us? And do we agree to meet regularly and keep track on our progress? It's a very simple conversation, and if you do that and there's clarity on it and everybody's agreed to it, then you can move forward. And if people don't agree, or if you can tell in their body language or their tone that they don't seem to want to agree, you ask them about it and you get clarity around it. You want to make sure, are we on the same page? Because if people are paying lip service to one of these, it's going to fall apart. So you want to try to flesh that out. The cost of avoiding difficult conversations here and trying to, and this is very common, to try to just speed through it because people are nodding or staying quiet or saying, yes, that sounds fine, I guess if we're going to do that, then that's what we'll do. If you get into those kinds of comments or anything in that direction, you should explore that and find out, why is there resistance? What's going on here? Or what seems to be a concern about this for you? And discuss those things and come to a real resolution. That kind of conversation builds trust within the team. When people can communicate and know they can communicate reservations, questions, hesitancies, and so on. And if you work through that, taking the time to have those kinds of uncomfortable conversations now, when the consequences are very low, it's really the consequences discomfort for 15 minutes in a conversation, not that big of a deal. That's better than having to wait a year or 2 and finding somebody is so far unaligned that they don't fit on the team and they're creating damage. And you actually have to have a hard conversation that's disciplinary, or having to ask them to leave or tell them to leave. Those are hard conversations. And you can avoid a lot of that by creating early upstream alignment. Or maybe even people will say, you know what? I understand everything that you're saying here, and I'm realizing this is not where I belong. That's difficult to hear. Better when somebody self-selects out of the team, then you have to remove them later because you recognize they don't fit and you have to force a confrontation around that. This third step is to operationalize alignment. And I'm just going to go over this very quickly so this doesn't get too long. But as I mentioned before, your values need to be described behaviorally. So if you have a value of quality, you want to behaviorally describe what quality means to you. So if you're in healthcare, what does it mean to provide quality healthcare in a nursing facility? If you're in construction, what does quality mean in terms of how you prepare a job site, or how you relate to a client, or how you take care of your equipment, or how you, any of those kinds of topics, whatever is important to you. So you want to describe that, not a treatise on this, but at least 1 or 2 sentences that give people a sense of, this is what we mean by behaving or practicing in terms of quality. And you do that for each of your values. Vision and priorities have to be measurable. It's very hard, if not impossible, to provide accountability if you don't have measurability around your vision. So if you've achieved your vision, we'll know it because we can measure A or B or C. Same thing with priorities. We know we've accomplished those or are making progress because these metrics have been achieved. Roles and responsibilities have to be very clear. It's very clear that this is what's your job and this is what's my job. And this is the line between us. This is where it's yours and this is where it's mine. And if there's overlap, it should be clear, how do we navigate that overlap so that we don't fight over it or both neglect it. Success behaviors need to be observable. They need to be demonstrated. Ideally, they should also be measurable, but you want them to be you don't want to say things like, we're all going to work our best, because nobody knows what that means, or have a good work ethic, or have a good attitude, because nobody knows what that stuff means. So if you're working on attitude, then you want to be able to say something like, what is the specific attitude we're talking about? And maybe it's the tendency, it's not attitude at all. It's the tendency for people to gossip, let's say, about other coworkers. Like, okay, we agree, we will not gossip about other coworkers. And if somebody hears it, they'll interrupt and say no gossiping, or, whatever term. Come up with a funny little joke that you can slide in to kind of break the gossip rut that people are in. And everybody recognizes, like, oh yes, we're not doing this. And then the last thing with accountability is easy to do if you have a regular schedule and you have clear, measurable indicators around these things. And the last step 4, is you have to reinforce this. And again, that's accountability. This comes from modeling. The executive or the owner or the CEO or whatever your title is, you have to live out these values. You have to pursue this vision. You have to accomplish your priorities. Stay in your lane that's defined for yourself. You need to model these success behaviors, and you need to both be accountable and ensure accountability for everyone else. That is on you. You have to just wake up in the morning and make this stuff happen. If you do, an amazing amount of alignment and just not quite frictionless, but let's just say frictionless speed happens, because all of a sudden people are moving and they're following your pace. They're following what you're doing. If you violate these things, they understand, okay, there's exceptions. And maybe I'm going to make an exception for myself too. And things start to not work. And so really you want to reinforce it. View accountability as more of a coach that's helping people, review their game tapes and use a timer to track their splits and those kinds of things. It's not so much about being punitive. Now, the reality is there are some people that are intrinsically unaligned. They're not a fit for your team. Now, that may not be true for every team. Hopefully it's not, but it is commonly true, especially if organizations haven't thought about these issues and you're trying to create alignment. Sometimes alignment's very difficult. The right answer is not to figure out how do we all as a group of people align around ourselves. That's probably not the right answer for your group. Instead, what the answer is this is where we're going to go, and maybe there's 1 or 2 people that don't want to go in that direction, or they don't want to work in that way. And that's not necessarily wrong. It's not necessarily immoral to have a different value system or a different vision or different priorities or a sense of a different role that you want to have. None of those things are intrinsically necessarily wrong. But if the whole team doesn't have a sense of alignment around that, it's not going to work. So what you're going to have to be able to do is recognize when somebody isn't fitting and they don't seem to want to. And I can just tell you from having done this for decades, you just call that for what it is and you help that person find a graceful, dignified off-ramp as quickly as possible in a way where they don't land hard, but you don't take a year to help somebody find their off-ramp. You just make it happen. And that it is difficult to do, and it's also difficult to keep them on the team. So you've got 2 difficulties. That's part of the joy of being a leader, is it's your job to decide between difficulties, so you have to pick the right one. And in this case, the right one is the one that preserves the team and helps you all, or the majority of you, accomplish the goals that you've set out to pursue. I've seen this happen frequently when you have executive team members that are very good or skilled at one thing or a couple of different things, or they've been there for a very long time. And so there's a lot of longevity or history with that person. And so there's this sense of we need to make exceptions for that person or accommodations for that person, as opposed to we all need to be on the same page. And it just doesn't work. I have never seen it work. And you can go ahead and try to be the one exception, and feel free to write me about it if you win at it. But my hypothesis would be is that you'll end up having a more painful process by not recognizing this isn't going to actually work. And so we need to figure out a way to amicably part ways and do that really as kind of quickly as is respectfully and conveniently possible. Yeah, the longer you dance around that, the more problems tend to be created. And I understand it's hard to do, and you have to manage legal issues and political issues and all these kinds of things. Point is do it and get it done when you can. Does that sound tough? It is kind of tough stuff. It's hard to do, but as I said, you leave those kinds of people in there and they stay unhappy because they recognize they're not part of the team, and it just kind of creates this toxicity, and it just doesn't work, and nobody ends up feeling better off as a result for it. So that's where I just feel like, just name it. This is what's going on. It's not going to work. So let's figure out a better home for you and a place that works for us. So here's the point. Just getting agreement, getting people to nod their head or not voice dissent doesn't mean that there's alignment. To have alignment, you need to have people who are moving together in a supportive way in the same direction. And that's eventually what this process, if you put it into place and you protect it and you reinforce it, that's what will happen. So now you have a step-by-step process for building real alignment on your executive team. But alignment will not last if your team can't handle honest conversations. That requires trust. I break down how to build that kind of trust structurally in the video on the screen right now. Click it and I'll walk you through how to build real trust in your team so that you can finally step back and let go.